Part 3, Liberation of the Being from its Mind. Chapter 5, Being Abnormally Honest. I ought to go upright and vital and speak the rude truth in all ways. Ralph Waldo Emerson. When the being for whom the light first came on in the womb and who is the background aliveness run by the involuntary nervous system speaks, it uses a particular language. The mind, which grew out of the being like trees grow out of the earth, is at first a protector of being and after a while becomes a parasite. When the mind speaks, it also uses a particular language. The language of the being is descriptive language. The language of the mind is evaluative language. When you tell the truth, you are free simply by virtue of describing what is so. This descriptive language evokes a feeling of affirmation, a willingness to be, an appreciation for being alive in the world as it is. When someone speaks the truth, everyone around them is touched, and there is hardly anything to say back except, "Ain't it the truth?" The being within which the mind resides is then speaking and is in charge of the mind rather than getting used by the mind. The secret of the good life is not suffocating in the mind's bullshit. Bullshit is like heroin or a warm blanket or money in the bank or life insurance. It feels so good and protected and safe and warm that even if you do choke on your own puke, you don't mind so much. The alternative, freedom, is often too terrifying for a mind to tolerate, so the mind hides from freedom behind piles of bullshit, under blankets of evaluation, in a bed of memories. Describing what is true ruins the escape from freedom that being lost in. Describing what is true ruins the escape from freedom that being lost in the mind offers. Descriptive words come out of beings who are in charge of their minds. Evaluative language comes out of minds in charge of being. People who speak simply and clearly have chosen freedom over the escape into the illusion of security. Freedom, the language of freedom, the feeling of freedom. An honest person is free by virtue of not being lost in her own mind. An honest person is a being within whom the ongoing flow of experience occurs, and who has a mindful of guiding abstractions, but for whom neither circumstance nor principles dictate action. Action that is clearly intentional occurs, but results from consciousness of circumstance, of principles, and of consciousness itself. The simple language that points to experience, as well as language that summarizes and abstracts from experience, are both spoken by the honest person. The unitary background principle is not the level of abstraction, but the intention to accurately describe what is so, regardless of considerations of propriety. When I speak clearly, I experience movement and sensation in my body and evoke the same in the body of the person spoken to. When they speak back clearly, we both are moved again. Honest people are continually surprised by unexpected sensation and movement, and have learned not to mind that so much. The time comes when the feeling of insecurity becomes less than a dreaded occurrence. It becomes a most precious and valued form of excitement, a way of experiencing being alive in a heightened way, a way of getting high. Most of us never overcome the butchering of our upbringing enough to discover how to tolerate the experience of freedom and learn to relish having it. Words are labels for pictures, and none of them are real. About a dozen times in the past 25 years, I have gone to Greece, to the island of Patmos, which I particularly love. Every time I go, I strike out walking across the hills, looking at the sea and the other islands in the distance and the blue sky, saying over and over to myself in my mind, "Damn, I'm just glad to be back. I am back again. This is just like before. It's as beautiful as ever. This sure is beautiful." After I walk a while, I begin to settle down and I start talking to myself in a different way. Those are just rocks. That is just dirt. That is just water. Those are just other islands. After some time of this, it occurs to me how beautiful this is. It seems to come out of the sea and the light and the sky and the land. The word beautiful seems to describe an experience that occurs out of being there in that moment. When I was using the other word earlier, it came out of my memories, making comparisons with other times and places. It was a reiteration of something I already knew. The first beautiful was from my mind. The second came from my experience, and my mind described it. A word is only a label for a picture of something real. So there is reality. Then there is a picture of reality. Then there is a word or words to describe the picture. A word or short phrase is only a caption for a remembered snapshot of a real thing, not the real thing. Real things are here right now and can be pointed to. That may seem unimportant or self-evident, but it turns out to make a critical difference in who you think you are. Pictures of reality are not reality, but pictures of reality are more accurate than words describing pictures of reality. You can perceive many more colors with your senses than you can report with the language of description. So many tones of each color exist that only a kind of gross pointing to occurs with the words red, pink, blue, etc. There is a time in the evenings right after sunset when ultraviolet light transforms green to super greens, outlines all the shapes and colors, and the colors are one tone more. This time provokes in me an eerie feeling that accompanies the heightened color perception. I love walking at sunset, but it makes me a little sad. The blues I have in the evening, deep and sad and full of love and a sense of passing away, can't be evoked by language so much as by evening itself. And likewise, when I attempt to speak to you of feelings within my own being, it is hard to know what you get from what I say. I have enough difficulty describing the tones of color or sound or warmth or other sensations. So when I attempt to share feelings within me, evoked by some already indescribable evening, the task is even harder. Language may be inadequate to the task of complete communication. Sometimes, when we make love, we think and feel that a communication deeper than language occurs. But how can you tell? There is no way to verify this connection except with language that can't quite express what I be like or you. There is no way to verify this connection except with language that can't quite express what I like, what I be like or you be like. So weird. Take, for example, when we be making love. Okay, there have got to be typos. Can't quite express what I am like or what you are like, I think is what it's meant to say. Take, for example, when we are making love. There have been times when I thought sex was incredible, and I was sure my partner particularly enjoyed it, and I asked, and she said she thought it was okay, but not the best. The reverse has also happened. I think, how can that be? But it is clear how that can be. We are different people having perhaps similar but not the same experiences. Telling the truth is hard enough if we all mean by it. Telling the truth is hard enough if all we mean by it is communicating what events occur. without even trying to communicate about our feelings. When we are watching a sunset with another person, we can always just point to the sunset and keep our mouths shut and assume we are communicating both about the experience and our evaluation of the experience. When there is no sunset to point to, one has to be particularly concerned with language. E. Cummings says that a poet is someone who is abnormally fond of that precision which creates movement. I say this is true of an honest person. Being descriptive of one's own feelings in so precise a way as to evoke feeling in another is the heart of the creative power of poetry and of honest speech. Telling the truth about events requires some discipline of description and can be hard work, but feelings and thoughts are even more difficult to tell the truth about than events. All words are abstractions, although words that have immediate reference in the world are less abstract than words that cover a lot of territory, speak of general feelings, or make global assessments. They are still not the thing described. Words can point to something in the world, like a chair, or something in a person, like a feeling. When one is totally committed and captivated by pointing to what is so, one finds words to speak the truth, regardless of the level of abstraction. Abstractions are a part of what is so. Feelings associated with abstractions are a part of what is so. You can still tell the truth by pointing to an abstraction or assessment of your mind, if your intent is simply to point out your thought, rather than to make the other person believe your thought to be the right interpretation of reality. This is the difference between sharing and a sales pitch. When thoughts and feelings are shared in this way, you get the benefit of the correction or modification of your mind's view of reality that can only come when you put your thoughts out there in the public domain. In an introduction to a book of poems, E. Cummings had this to say of his poetry. He was speaking poetically and honestly about the dilemma I am attempting to describe here. Quote, "It is with roses and locomotives, not to mention acrobats, spring, electricity, Coney Island, the 4th of July, the Eyes of Mice, and Niagara Falls, that my poems are competing. They are also competing with each other, with elephants, and with El Greco." He has had his attention wholly captured in the highest form of concentration possible, fascination. Being completely given over to these experiences allowed him to create the sentence that compared them with each other. To report on the electrifying experience of being with exemplary instances of aliveness awakens us to the truth of our experience. My experiences of being present to a child's laughter, a sunset, the Eyes of Mice, and Niagara Falls are records in my mind that can be re-evoked by language that points to these magnificent events. Somehow, when language brings them together, it almost outdoes the events. E. Cummings uses language first to evoke the recollection of the experiences themselves, and second, through putting together the recollections, evokes an experience of the combined evoked experiences. The whole of them together are a compilation of magnificence. I am moved not only by the experience, but also by the magnificence of the being who perceives them as alike in wonderment. I love E. Cummings for his words. I love me through loving him through loving his words. I love all of us magnificent beings for the magnificence of being beings who can appreciate the magnificence of being. E. Cummings was a man who was interested in the truth. I am interested in the truth. I know that you are interested in the truth. I know that all of us are. I am interested in the truth of humans being. So are you. I am interested in the ways we attempt to communicate the truth of our human being. So are you. I am eternally frustrated by the limits of language, as well as fascinated by the freedom from the mind jail language can sometimes provide. Language makes a jail, but language also is the cake with the file in it. Language has the power to evoke the being of human beings and rescue them from their own minds. Skill in the use of this kind of language develops through the practice of telling the truth. The clearer I am willing to be about myself, the more clearly I can see others, and the more clearly I can speak to them. You too. An honest person prefers language that reveals what is so, whether it's about someone else, the world, or himself. Being fascinated with uncovering the truth from a nest of evaluations is the best game in town. It only becomes fun after meaning becomes less serious and pretending has become boring. Going back to putting on a show is a bigger drag than having all be known. Playing in a world where all is known is more challenging and less trivial and less wearing. Letting up on oneself about having to hide and pretend is freeing, and it feels good, like breathing fresh air. Only willingness to hew close to the truth, like some gritty old populist newspaper editor, wins through to the liberation that comes from telling the truth. It's almost impossible to do without great commitment. It can, however, be done even by the most mind-ravaged people, if they have the support of other people who are also committed to telling the truth. Telling the truth sucks. Telling the truth means all of the worst things you might imagine it means. It means telling everything you have hidden that you have done in the past to the very people who you think would be most hurt or angry or surprised or embarrassed by the revelations. If, for example, you have been having sex with someone other than your spouse, you have to tell him or her all of the details. Who you did it with, how many times, who came first, how many times you came, where it happened, whom you told, what you said to each other, how much fun it was, and so on, and answer all the questions that arise from the telling. Telling the truth means telling all your secrets and your secret feelings to whomever you don't want to tell. Telling the truth means telling all your secrets and your secret feelings to whomever you don't want to tell. Worse yet, it means being expressive of feeling. Mad when you express resentment, and warm and moved when you express appreciation, and silent when you don't yet know what you feel. Telling the truth has to do with being expressive of feeling and using descriptive language regardless of ideas about tact or propriety. The first thing you have to get over to tell the truth is politeness. Modification of your report of your experience out of consideration of other people's feelings. That is, unless your spouse gets a clear feeling from your report of how much fun it was when you fucked his best friend, you haven't told the truth yet. Honest people speak simply, using language more to describe than to evaluate. Liars evaluate almost exclusively, only using enough description to make the story believable. Good liars use a little more description than bad liars, more subtle in its cast of value, so the listener thinks she came up with the idea about whether what happened was good or bad. Hours and hours of practice and observation have helped us all in developing our ability to manipulate in this way. We all have a sales pitch about the nature of reality. When a person chooses to make the transition from habitual lying to truth-telling, the passage is scary and difficult. We have learned to assign value dishonestly and pitch our point of view with everything we say. We have been trained by scores of moralistic authorities, like Nurse Ratched in Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, to keep our mouths shut and behave as we should instead of speaking the truth. We have been blackmailed into a common interpretation of reality by hundreds of male and female Nurse Ratcheds. Learning to describe, to speak what is simply true, requires an unlearning of hard-earned preconceptions and a relearning of how to perceive with as little preconception as possible. Knowing the difference between perception and conception and getting good through practice at distinguishing between the two can save your life. Both the quality and length of your life can be increased through learning to focus on making this distinction over and over again between value-laden words and descriptive words. Descriptive words make pictures happen in the minds of the speaker and the hearer, create experiences like sexual excitement, anger, righteous indignation, embarrassment, sympathy, sadness, joyfulness, or laughter. An honest person is one who is creating vivid pictures, feelings, sounds, and smells in the singular attempt to portray what has occurred or is occurring within her or around her. An honest person is concerned foremost with accuracy. Being honest is not just for the sake of feeling good about being virtuous. It is a vital necessity. That means your life depends on it. Learning how to be honest and being willing to do so is the cure for all non-environmental stress disorders. It is the key to managing the disease of moralism. It is the most worthwhile focus of our attention as humans of this time, and the only thing with half a chance to save us from ourselves. This is vital to our life and to the survival of life for all of us. Our problems do not arise from not thinking enough before we speak. Just the opposite is true. The way we learn to think and modify what we have to say before we speak kills millions of us unnecessarily and lays waste most of the cripples left, injured but still alive. In the Centers for Disease Control study referred to in the introduction, the list of causes of deaths in individuals under age 65 goes like this. Environment is responsible for 21% of deaths, the healthcare system for 9%, and human biology for 17%. Think about that. 21% of the people who die before age 65 are killed by war, traffic, accidents, acts of God, and crime. 9% get killed by doctors, nurses, hospitals, and medicine. In 17% of the cases, the human biological machine breaks in some way that is not blamable on the way people took care of themselves. That means the remaining 53% of the deaths prior to age 65 come about as a result of the way people choose to live their lives. I believe the ways we take care of ourselves so poorly arise out of the starvation we experience from being cut off from the nourishment of commonplace experience, including the experience of intimacy. We are responsible for cutting ourselves off from experience by substituting our interpretations of reality for reality. We invent some fundamental lies about how life should be and shouldn't be, how life is or isn't according to what we have taught ourselves to ignore or deny, and what can or cannot be talked about. We compensate for our sense of something missing and our boredom with a kind of frenetic, compulsive use of food, alcohol, and drugs to try to get temporary relief from imprisonment in our own minds. We are all liars. People with notable stress disorders like ulcers, insomnia, spastic colitis, etc. are worse liars than normal people, although so-called normal people are generally unhappy from lying, withholding, hiding, and avoiding and evading as well. A lot of what I have to say is depressing and negative. Nevertheless, I invite you to take courage from what I say and begin the work of learning to tell the truth. When I say what people normally do, please take it as a personal invitation to be abnormal. The best way to judge what is normal is simply to look into the faces of people walking down the street or on the subway or driving to work. Keep track of how many look happy. In my most recent count, 7 out of 10 looked either dead or damned unhappy. This is an invitation to abnormality from someone who has tried both normal lying and abnormal truth-telling.